There are dates in history that have been labeled as harbinger or bellwether of prosperity and good fortune. And then there are also dates, or rather eras, that have gone down in history in infamy as metaphors of persecution, atrocities and exterminations. One such date is 27th January that brought curtains down on almost 12 years of mass slaughter, deliberate and systemic killings before and during the time of Second World War. Every year, 27th January is observed as the Holocaust Remembrance Day. In this video, we take you to a somber trip back to the period between 1930s to 1940s when the gravest and definitely the most unforgivable crime against humanity was committed. But before that, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our new channel, In Depth. In order to understand the most diabolical crime committed against mankind, it's imperative to understand few basic terms and then the political climate in which they took place. The term Holocaust refers to mindless, deliberate and carefully planned mass killings of European Jews along with other minorities whom the German authorities, especially Hitler, thought were too degenerate to exist. In other words, they were massacred for simply who they were because of their race and because of the madness of just one person. 27 January marks the day in 1945 when Auschwitz, the largest Nazi death camp located in Poland, was liberated. That day, over 7,000 prisoners who were being held captive were freed by the members of the Allied forces. This date brought an end to the German madness against Jews and other minority groups. 27 January was designated by the United Nations as the Holocaust Remembrance Day in 2005, although several nations have their own days dedicated to it. The theme of this year is home and belonging. Now, let's get to the real story. In 1918, Germany lost the First World War. German nationalists and extremists blamed the defeat on the Jews. They also accused the Jews of being capitalist exploiters who profited at the expense of others. Along with it, the Jews were accused of being followers of communism who were after world domination by means of a revolution. And then, soon after, the establishment of Nazi Party set the tone for the massacre of Jews. The Nazi was a political party in Germany that was established in 1919 in the aftermath of World War I. It was the short form for the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party, or the NSDAP. This was the time when Germany was recuperating from the loss in the First World War and was being forced to pay reparations to the winners. Many Germans were extremely poor and there were not simply enough jobs to take up. And one reason many Germans turned to the Nazis was the hope that they would bring about change. Nazis were racist and believed that what they called their Aryan race was more important than others. The Nazis said an Aryan was somebody who was Germanic. The Nazis believed that Jews, Roma, black people and other ethnic groups were inferior to Aryans. They also believed that Germany was a better country than others and that their people's superiority meant they could and should dominate other people. This led Germany to invade and take over other countries before and during World War II. In 1921, Adolf Hitler became the leader of the party. Almost after a decade, in January 1933, the Nazis were invited to form a government after they were voted as the largest party in the election. From the moment his party came to power, Hitler set out to impose Nazi values on all aspects of German life, taking control using fear and terror. From the moment they came to power in 1933, the Nazis persecuted people who they did not think were worthy members of society, most notably Jewish people. In 1934, Hitler proclaimed himself as Führer and Reichskanzler, that meant leader and Reichschancellor. In 1935, the Nuremberg racial laws came into force. Jews were forbidden to marry non-Jews. Jews also lost their citizenship, which officially turned them into second-class citizens with fewer rights than non-Jews. And to get to the bottom of their agenda, the Nazis used a variety of camps throughout their time in power to persecute, control and eventually murder their opponents. Primarily, there were two types of camps: concentration camps and extermination camps. Concentration camps, as the name makes it very clear, these were places where people were concentrated and imprisoned without trial. Inmates were usually exploited for their labor and kept under harsh conditions. In Nazi Germany after 1933 and all across Nazi-controlled Europe between 1938 and 1945, concentration camps became a major way in which the Nazis imposed their control. Extermination camps, on the other hand, were used to kill Jews by using a variety of methods such as gassing them to death, shooting en masse and poisoning. The first camp, called the Hau, was opened in March 1933 just outside of Munich. It reportedly held over 188,000 prisoners from its inception until its end, of which about 28,000 died. And with this, the large-scale killings began. The Nazis then initiated a nationwide pogrom from 9th of November 1938 known as Kristallnacht, in which they burnt 191 synagogues and looted around 7,500 Jewish shops, killed scores of Jews and sent thousands to concentration camps. It became known as Kristallnacht or the Night of Broken Glass due to the smashed glasses that covered the streets from shops that were raided. The German invasion of Poland in September 1939 heralded a new, more radical phase of the persecution of the Jews. During this period, the Nazis were planning to deport the Jews from the occupied territories to reservations in Poland or to the territory of the Soviet Union after its planned conquest. In June 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Hitler declared a war of destruction on Germany's ideological enemy, the communist regime. The army command was notified that war crimes would not be forgiven and that they had permission to execute all criminal suspects without trial. And then came the most crucial step of the Nazis and Hitler's plan, the final solution. The Wannsee Conference was held in Berlin in January of 1942, where the German civil service and the Nazi party discussed the final solution of the Jewish question, a plan to completely annihilate Europe's Jews. The Nazis began preparing for the murder of more than 2 million Jews living in the general government, the occupied part of Poland. The Nazis also experimented with mass murder in other occupied and annexed areas of Eastern Europe. In Chelmno, they introduced the use of gas to kill Polish Jews. This method was faster and considered less aggravating for the SS officers involved than shooting people. Under the code name Reinhard, the Nazis built several extermination camps, Belzec, Sobibor and Treblinka. Here, the victims were murdered in gas chambers with diesel engine exhaust fumes immediately upon their arrival. But the most infamous and the largest camp was the Auschwitz in southern Poland. Auschwitz was both a labor camp and an extermination camp. And so, upon arrival, the Jews were selected according to their age, health and ability to work. Those who were not fit enough were gassed immediately. The others had to do forced labor under barbaric conditions. The work was extremely hard, the little food was of poor quality, hygiene was poor, and Jews were often maltreated. This program is therefore also referred to as extermination through labor. As the war progressed, Jews were brought in from other occupied parts of Europe. In 1943 and 1944, deportations started from the occupied regions in Italy, Hungary, Greece, and the Balkans. Only when the Allies were drawing near, by the end of 1944, did the persecution of the Jews slowly come to a halt. In the last months of the war, thousands of Jews and other prisoners died during the death marches after the Germans had evacuated the concentration camps to prevent the prisoners from falling into the hands of the Allied troops. Even after liberation, people still died of malnutrition, disease and exhaustion. On January 27, 1945, the Soviet army finally entered Auschwitz and liberated more than 7,000 remaining prisoners who were mostly ill and dying. It is estimated that at minimum 1.3 million people were deported to Auschwitz between 1940 and 1945. Of this, at least 1.1 million people were murdered. In totality, during these times, over 6 million Jews were mercilessly killed by the hands of Germans. And that was the gory and bloody history behind 27 January, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. We hope we have been able to walk you through the worst massacre that ever took place in the history of the mankind and perhaps the like of which will never ever recur. Thank you for being with us through this trip back in time.